I am looking at this from the perspective of social justice and human rights.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in Massachusetts.
It doesn't matter whether you're a person of faith, Muslim or not, or even secular or atheist, because there is value in utilizing a rights-affirming language in advancing our common cause, our common good.
What happens when a Malaysian Muslim woman defies expectations and challenges patriarchy? Well, if her name is Annie Zonneveld, she embarks on a career of activism, organizing, and leadership that includes founding 2 progressive Muslim nonprofits, and winning a Grammy Award along the way. This week on The State of Belief, you'll meet Annie Zonneveld, author of a brand new memoir titled The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. We need these voices to be heard now more than ever. Please make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Taking a minute to do these things really helps other people discover our show and become listeners too. Let's build a movement. Our library of past conversations includes almost 150 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Representative James Tallarico, Bishop Marion Buddy, Dr. Anethea Butler, John Fugelsang, and many others. You can help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution right now. Find out how at stateofbelief.com and how you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Okay, before we get to our wonderful interview, I do have something on my mind that I want to share with you. Many of you probably saw the CNN interview with Doug Wilson. And this was just a painful thing to watch, I have to say. Doug Wilson is a Christian nationalist pastor who is out in Idaho, but who has also started a church plant in Washington, D.C., and it was a conversation with CNN about his beliefs, and it was really tough to watch because these are not marginalized communities. These are folks who have the ear of this administration. And the things they really talked about were shocking, especially this week when we're talking to a woman who is a feminist in her own tradition. They talked about things like women in America being, better for them not to have the right to vote. They want to take away the 19th Amendment for women to have the right to vote. Women should be subordinate to their husbands. Of course, all rights of the LGBTQ community should be erased. They say they want a Christian nation. They want a Christian nation, and eventually they want a Christian world. And what they mean by a Christian nation, of course, is their own dominance. And their God is power. Their God is control. And that's what they want to do over all of us. And they are serious, and they have a lot of power. This is what we've been talking about on this podcast for a long time. It's what Interfaith Alliance is made for, to resist this. But if you have the stomach for it, do go watch this CNN. It wasn't an expose because they're not like, it wasn't gotcha. They were happy to say, one of the things they talked about was Doug Wilson also was like slavery wasn't all bad. There were good, slave owners, and just a lot of really disturbing things. But most disturbing is they really want to control you. They want to control all of us. They want to dictate what morality is for all of us. They want to dictate what pursuing life and happiness is for all of us. They want to establish their religion for all of us in direct contradiction to the First Amendment. So let's take all of this really seriously. Let's not like say, oh, these guys are fringe. They're not fringe. And I want to say one of the reasons they're not fringe is we had the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, retweeted this whole show, saying all of Christ for all of life, basically endorsing these positions. And we know that Hegseth doesn't believe in women in the military, aside from in kind of subordinate positions. But really, this is very serious. He believes in a theocracy, and those of us who believe in democracy have to be really aware of this. We have to stand up to it. We can't pretend like, okay, so, of course, it doesn't matter what they think. They are grabbing power. We have to understand the dynamics of power. Will we preserve the America and expand the America that we believe in, even as they're trying to constrict the America to represent just their vision? And they are coming for every aspect of life, business, culture, religion, every aspect of it. It's like the Seven Mountains theory. I don't need to get into that. But I just want you all to know about that and just to kind of appreciate that's exactly why we exist, is that we have to be stronger than them. We have to ultimately prevail against this idea of a Christian nationalist vision where all of us are subsumed to the vision of these essentially white, straight men who are dictating to the rest of us what we can and cannot believe. And that's not shade against white, straight men. Many of my best friends and my family are white, straight men. This is not about that. It's just that this is the identity that they think has to prevail in America. And that's not what any of us want to be about. We believe America's strength is in our diversity, is in the multiple ways that we can be together. If we have something to offer the world, it's this idea of democracy and this idea of, different people living side by side in peace. And so I just want to make sure that you all were aware that this CNN piece happened, that, Hegseth, who is now taking over D.C., the Army has now taken over D.C. The National Guard has usurped the power from the D.C. police. And this is all of a piece, and it's all about power, and it's all about control. And those of us who can have to fight back. And now to my guest. Ani Zonneveld is a multi-talented Malaysian-born musician, Grammy-winning songwriter, and passionate activist who has forged a unique path blending art, faith, and social justice. As the daughter of a diplomat, she was raised at posts in Germany, Egypt, and India. After 9/11, Ani turned from a successful music career to confront the growing hate and fear-filled narratives around Islam. Of course, her inclusive, feminist values didn't align with every Muslim community either, all of which led her to found Muslims for Progressive Values in 2007, an international organization championing LGBTQ plus inclusion, gender equality, interfaith marriage, and human rights from a faith-based perspective. Ani's fascinating new memoir is titled The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. And I am thrilled that it brings her to the state of belief. Ani, welcome.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You and I actually go pretty far back because
Yes,
I
we do.
remember when I first started at Huffington Post, which was, literally decades ago. We can start saying it's weird when your life allows you to start saying decades ago, but really a long time ago. And you had started this great organization and Muslims for Progressive Values, and I remember us, having conversations, and you being kind of part of the Huffington Post world, and Javed Kaleem, featuring your work, a great religion reporter. So this is not Johnny Come Lately work for you.
No,
This is your life.
And I had a
This
column,
is your life.
I had a column on Huffington Post.
Yes, I remember that. Absolutely. And so can you take us back? Like you have a really fascinating history, and we're so glad that people are going to be able to appreciate it. The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. Why unlikely?
Because I was raised so privileged as a diplomat's daughter. Um, but the privilege was not just in the status, but the privilege, in my opinion, is the way I was raised. And that is my parents made sure that I was, very conscientious of social issues. And so even though we were pampered, they made sure that we had these educational excursions where we saw what was, how others suffered because of politics and economics, for example. And the unlikely part is that, I mean, so my upbringing is what anchored me in my values, anchors me in my values. But the unlikely part is because I live in Los Angeles, I was in the music business and, I live
Mm,
in here in LA. And so I'm privileged. So I don't have to do this work. I'm
mm,
good, right?
yeah,
But my social justice conscience and the way I was raised, like there's no way I can just turn a blind eye to a lot what's going on in our society. So that's why
right,
the unlikely is in
right. In your book, when you start thinking about, because I think sometimes when you write a book like that, some things start showing up that you're like, oh, right, I'm remembering that. I remember that moment with my family, or I remember that. And all of a sudden there seems to be moments that are more laden with meaning. What are some of the moments that you can remember? You mentioned it, like being exposed to things that your family made sure you were aware of. Can you think of particular moments that stood out to you that you wanted to make sure to include in your memoir?
yes. So here in Los Angeles, for example, a few years ago, we partnered with Hindus for Human Rights and other faith-based organizations, and how we realized that the Dalits, the untouchables in the caste system, were being discriminated in the workspace by Hindus of the higher castes in the tech industry. And so we had lobbied to get the word caste included in the discrimination categories in California law. And for me, I'm not a Dalit, I'm not a Hindu, I'm Muslim, but it really resonated for me because when I was in India, living in India, I used to have my soccer drills with a gardener's son, and they were Dalits. And my mom came up to me and said, "Hey, Ani, I just want you to know that, some folks are, talking behind your back about how, as an ambassador's daughter, you shouldn't be playing soccer with the child of a Dalit, right? Who's a Dalit."
Mm,
So, and I'm like, so, who cares? And my mom said, "No, I'm just telling you how society is. Just carry on with what you're doing, So that's some of the example. And there are other examples about caste system that I also write about and how that has really visual, I'm writing about it in a very visual way to express that we were, even as a child, were actively anti-racist.
mm,
We didn't know that, we didn't have that academic term, but that's how we lived our lives, right? So
mm-hmm,
that's one example. Another example is that when I was about 12 years old, we lived in Cairo, and my dad made arrangements with the Egyptian military escort to go and visit Port Said City, which was right by Sinai and the Sinai Peninsula, and it was right after the Sinai War with Israel, and so he took us there just to like, this is what war looks like, kids,
mm,
and so I see bombed homes and apartment buildings sliced, and you can see people's personal belongings. You can hear landmines being detonated by the military, and so all of that. And so for me, I describe that too as from a young age how it has. I hate war, and so I'm very anti-war. I can't watch violence on television. It just makes my stomach turn. So those are some of the my upbringing
yeah,
that has really affected the way I work and think, and yeah, my belief system.
yeah. I think the term for some of being a Muslim and also being LGBTQ inclusive. That's you and I know that that's not that uncommon. You and I know that out there, that's actually, I'm sure, I don't have the exact statistics, but this is not an uncommon thing. But there's a narrative out there that those two things can't go together.
Yeah.
How did that become part of your sense of calling and what you were trying to create with Muslims for Progressive Values, but also in your own life?
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I just want to acknowledge, my heart goes out to the family of Imam Dayi, who was the first openly gay imam who passed away
Right.
last Sunday. So we're pretty, really sad about it because obviously he was very much involved in Muslims for Progressive Values, and contributed a lot to the progressive theology, one that is inclusive of LGBT Muslims. For me, after 9/11, when I decided to relearn Islam for myself, because this whole jihad thing, I was like, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm born and raised Muslim. I've never heard of suicide, killing innocent people by way of suicide. I mean, it's such a double whammy. It's crazy. So I decided, like, well, okay, do I still want to be a Muslim? And if so, why? And if not, why? Why I had to have my reasons. And so as I was
Mm.
relearning Islam, for myself, I realized that it was actually really more egalitarian than even how I was raised, and more inclusive, and all these wonderful things that were erased or not taught to us. Obviously patriarchy had its reasons, right? So it's a constant theme, this patriarchal and all these traditions. And so when I was so at that point, I was like, well, if it's so egalitarian and inclusive, and if there's a spirit of God in all of us, regardless of whether you're Muslim or not, whether you're straight or gay or what trans or what have you, then why are we discriminating, basis on religion, sex, gender identity, what have you? So for me, if I'm really truly want to practice a real Islam, I need to shed any iota of discrimination, of this superiority over another. Not that I had anyway, because that's not how I was raised. But so it was easier for me. It was easy for me to embrace this inclusive and loving Islam. That's number one. And number two, I also write about this in my book, but I had an uncle that lived with us throughout the 16 years plus that we lived abroad, and he was my mother's brother, and he was our chef, and so he would cook for us, and he was always feminine, and I didn't know, he was gay. And so many, many decades later, I went to my oldest brother, and I asked him straight up, hey, was Uncle Bakar gay? And he was like, big, wide smile, said, yeah, he was gay. And then it kind of
Wow.
made sense. A lot of things started making sense after that. And so it was just, I was around, I was raised around my gay uncle, not knowing he was gay. And I also realize now that, there was that invisible wall between us. And I understand that why. I understand why. I
Uh-huh.
now understand why. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? You must have been able to pick up because your family had him close. You must have been able to pick up the kind of respect and that, like, maybe you weren't around as much, like, casual denigration of LGBTQ people that sometimes, even like, people who don't think about it, but because your uncle was there, maybe like they were less likely to do it. And I'm sure your mom must have known at the time. And so,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
and
And
so,
it's also like denying it, right? Or don't
uh,
ask, don't tell, that
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of.
right.
But I think also he was probably brought along with us for the 16 plus years as a way to give him something that was
Mm,
meaningful in his life, because he probably needed it, right?
mm,
So,
mm.
I don't actually talk to my mom about these things, because she doesn't really like what I'm doing.
Oh, tell me, say more about that. What is that? Does she, have you, I mean, because once you start, making, being public about the way and like, putting all of this into practice and try to, talk about this in a more public way, there are people who are saying, "What are you doing? Keep
Yeah.
quiet." And
Yeah.
so has that must have been part of your journey in this whole effort.
Yeah, and the thing about it, what's strange is, I am the product of the way my parents raised me, and that is inclusive, a discriminating worldview. I mean, they have never uttered any hate towards anyone. I've
Mm,
never heard them say anything negative about a group of people, a nationality, ethnicity, what have you. So, but our Muslim societies have changed, and since the 80s, it's become very Wahhabi. It's become so draconian and
mm,
very intolerant in its teachings. And the Islam I was raised on is very different from the Islam of today. And
mm,
so my mom has become more. I don't call it orthodox because it's not orthodox. It's what I call is more twisted,
mm.
patriarchal, tribal interpretation of Islam, based on the Wahhabism, the influence of Saudi Arabia, which now obviously has changed, 180 degrees, but the impact on Muslim societies will linger on for another generation at least.
Right.
So, and that's what I would say, the Saudi colonialism of their Islamic culture on Muslim societies. Now, we don't talk it in that term because we say colonialism as that white men thing. But no, we were colonized culturally by the Saudi version of Islam. Now, not just Malaysia, but the vast Muslim societies, right? So that's been the influence. And then my sister um, is also a graduate of Al Azhar University, and she studied Sharia law. And so coming from that school of thought, it's very rigid in its orthodoxy, intolerant. And so that has been the influence. In addition to cultural influence, that's been the theological influence in my family. So my family has shifted to the right, and I have shifted to a more egalitarian worldview.
Isn't that
I stayed in
fascinating?
the egalitarian worldview, let's put it that
Right.
way.
Well,
Yeah.
in some ways, I think the way you can tell it is that you stayed true to the way you were raised, the Islam in which you were raised in. Up next, much more with Ani Zonneveld. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. My guest is Ani Zonneveld, author of The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. It's been interesting. This is not in any way an endorsement or, to get too far into it. But I live in New York City, and the mayoral race has been interesting with a Muslim candidate. And Mandami, it's been kind of amazing to watch Mandami navigate the identity as a Muslim, but then, talking about trans rights, talking about like full egalitarian worldview.
Yeah.
And I think that's very confusing for some people who want to actually like pin something on him.
Yeah.
And I bet it's confusing to Muslims and non-Muslims alike who are used to being able to understand the playbook of Islam, in America.
Right. Yeah.
And he's bridging some really interesting things. And I think how he and Brad Lander have been creating coalition. And there was just an amazing video of both of them like in the Pride Parade with
Right.
flags and and like dancing around and having a blast and being unapologetic everything that they are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I meant by like there's a lot of Muslims out there. One, there's a lot of LGBTQ Muslims.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not like, people think, even in Christianity, they're like, well, you can't be Christian and gay. I'm just like, well, I mean, look around.
Yeah.
And, yeah, but also, like, I just think I'm wondering if you have noticed that navigation, and also, is there something generational that you've recognized over the years? I'm curious how you're sensing how your message is landing today in America, especially
Yeah.
in this moment we're in with MAGA, effort at domination.
Yeah. No, well, according to Pew, they did a study. They were doing a study of American Muslims over the span of 10 years. They asked the same questions in 2007, 2013, and 2017. And on the issue of LGBT rights, it went, in favor of LGBTQ rights, over the 10-year span, from 27% to 52% in favor of LGBTQ rights. And these are Muslims that they interviewed who identified as Muslims, who were mosque goers.
Hmm.
So that was very interesting. But obviously now the numbers are much higher, and it is also generational. But we've also seen how, so you talk about Mamdani, but let me give you a little bit of, and I write about this extensively. I have a chapter on LGBTQ rights, even. And it is really about putting the spotlight on the hypocrisy of the Muslim religious leaders in America, and how when Trump won, when Trump first time around was in office, the conservative Muslim mosques and leaders started redefining themselves as progressive.
Hmm.
And so they started using the human rights language. We are
Uh-huh.
egalitarian. We support LGBTQ rights. We support women's rights. It's all, just a cover so that the progressive left would come to their defense and protect them, and, paint over the walls that was spray painted with ugly messages that just really stuck up from Muslim rights during Trump one. You had the Muslim ban, and I
Right.
received my share of threats from the Trump fans. So then it was Biden, during Biden's term, midway, they decided to do a 180-degree pivot and says, "Oh, we apologize, we have sinned. It's wrong to be gay and Muslims." And they did this whole position statement that
Wow.
was really so ugly. And because they felt safe to come out and come back into their true, homophobic stance. And then I'm talking about like 150 Muslim religious leaders, right? Or claim to be leaders, and claim also to have the authority to speak for all Muslims, which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
bogus.
Yeah.
So that's like where are we now? 2025. So that was in 2023. And then when that statement came out, the political right, the Christian right took notice that, oh, we've got allies here,
These are our friends.
So then
That's
they
right.
started courting the Muslim right. So I define them as the Muslim right. And then October 7 happened, and then all this Islamophobic statements came popping back up. And then I was saying, oh, I guess this reminded the Muslim right about how Islamophobic the Christian right and the political right is. Hopefully that'll be the end to that relationship. But then came 2024, they started really courting the Muslim right aggressively, and obviously they won some of them over, and some of the imams advocated for the congregants to vote for Trump on the basis of supporting Palestine, supposedly. So, because of the issue with Gaza. So that's kind of like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
whiplash, of the Muslim
You,
rights.
you thank yeah,
It's
thank
not
you for
principled,
reminding
it's
me of
just
that. Yeah.
hypocrisy. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is you're absolutely right that the kind of the Christian right, especially the Christian right legal movement saw, oh, okay, it's one thing if we bring something, let's get the Muslims to bring it. For instance, in Mahmoud v. Taylor.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would have landed different had it been Christian right, but Muslims, and so and so one of the things we were trying to say with Mahmoud v. Taylor, which was the case for our listeners who can't remember exactly, it's the case where Muslim families were encouraged, frankly, by right-wing Christian legal organizations to file a complaint about being exposed at all to LGBTQ stories. Not about it wasn't they weren't pro LGBTQ stories. They were stories that had LGBTQ people in them, normalizing the existence of LGBTQ people, and the day of oral arguments, I stood up with Maggie Siddiqui, who you may know, who is, and we just both said, like, this is not an either or. We can have, like, I was like, as a gay parent, I want my kids to know about Islam. I want them to know that there's being studied side by side with Muslims. We can be together, and you don't have to agree with everything that everybody else, but we are in a democracy where we have to, hopefully we can. And so anyway, it's heartbreaking to see that alliance. It's like the interfaith of the right, which is like,
Well, yeah, yeah.
go ahead.
So there is the multiracial um, uh, right. It's the multiracial political right because
Hmm.
it's not just Muslims, it's also Hindus, with the
Yes.
Hindutva, et
Yeah. Yeah.
cetera. And there's also the Israeli lobbyists and the
Yeah.
Zionists and then the Christian right. So there's that's one camp. But I have to say, before the Christian law firms really encouraging the Muslims, it really started in Maryland. And so we were talking to the chair of the Montgomery County, the council chair, about how to address this because it popped up on my radar and people were calling me, how do we address
Yeah.
this without seemingly being anti-Muslim and so on and so forth. And then the one thing that, was also shared with me were WhatsApp messages in these groups about how CARE was saying, oh, we're going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court, right? When they lost the case in Maryland itself. And, folks need to understand the reason why we have the Muslim girl with a hijab dancing with her friends. This is in the Maryland public school curriculum. The reason why we have Pride Puppy, it's because gay kids were being bullied. It's because Muslim kids were being bullied after 9/11, right? We don't want any of that. So we should
Right.
really be encouraging each other, being exposed to each other's, cultures and traditions and so on with no prejudice. And if we can't have that in the public school system, then what the hell? I mean,
Yeah.
go to your Christian school, go to your Muslim school, leave the rest of us alone, right?
Right.
And
I mean,
so
thank you. That's
so
a
I wrote an
perfectly put.
op-ed on for our religion news service about this, and I said, this is a terrible. If we lose this case, is a terrible precedent. And what they also did was, even though the case at the Supreme Court was called Mahmoud versus Taylor, they also included some Christian families and Jewish families to win over the Supreme Court judges. Okay,
Hmm.
so that was
Hmm.
that as well. And but the thing about it is that this is a slippery slope because, there could be a group of parents like, you know what, we don't want pictures of black kids in our, teaching about that
I mean,
or
or
any subject
Muslim,
matter.
or Muslim.
Yeah,
The Muslim, if that offends our like Christian background, we would rather not have our kids exposed to like this religion that is. So I mean, it really does. It's like, oh, okay, so we're going to stop having any acknowledgement of the diversity of America in our
yeah.
public schools. It's really slippery slope is exactly right. It's terrible. And
And
what are teachers supposed to do? They're on
opt
pins
out
and
on
needles.
everything.
I
So
mean,
it's
Jesus.
it's crazy. And it's
Yeah.
such a, I mean, our society in America are so segmented already thanks to the
Mm.
media.
Uh-huh.
Um and the channels and things that are filtered for us.
Right.
The only thing left was our public schools,
Exactly.
curriculum
Well,
that we
it's part of a
did.
broader movement,
Yeah,
as you know, because we have the public schools, and then we also have, the libraries,
yeah,
and the libraries are also getting attacked,
yeah,
and censorship, and like and by the way, Muslim stories, there's people who are just like, get those out of there. And
yeah,
so, like, the idea, we have to be very careful. Of course, LGBT black stories, all of those are like the first challenge. Muslims are not far behind, and Jewish stories too.
yeah.
They don't like it. I mean, so it is a slippery
Well,
slope.
what I found most hypocritical is that these Muslim families and everyone backing them up had an issue with LGBT stories, but did not have an issue with Muslim stories. I mean, how hypocritical is that? I just,
Yeah, that's, I mean, exactly. That's, and that, when I stood with Maggie in front of the Supreme Court, I was just like, I want to hear stories. We want to hear each other's stories. And that's all we have. I mean, that's, so, but speaking of stories, and I want to turn to something that we haven't talked about yet because we went straight into, whatever, politics and so.
Politics.
Music. Let's talk about music. Can we talk about music and how music
Yes.
is part of your life? Because music for me was the way, frankly, that I became a minister. It's been my avenue to the divine. I mean, so much of my life has been about music. And I have to say, until I saw this book, I was like, she's a Grammy winner? What? Tell me about how music first appeared in your life and the role it continues to play in undergirding everything you do.
Yeah. Thank you. I was exposed to music as long as I can remember, so that's a long time. And my dad was the DJ of the house, believe it or not. He was a strict dad, 6 days out of the week, and then came Sunday, he was Mr. DJ in his sarong and his white singlet. So, and
Love it.
I would be immersed in all kinds of music, opera, traditional Malay music, nationalistic songs from Malaysia because we just had our independence and my dad was played a role in that. So I was really raising that in my blood. And so there's obviously, the Jacksons, the Osmonds, Petula Clark, Louis Armstrong, the whole spectrum.
Wow, isn't that amazing? Like, really, no, but that's so instructive. Like, there's not
Yeah.
one place. It
Yeah.
goes to all we've been talking about, frankly,
Yes.
that there's
Yeah.
something to gain from so many places. Why would
Exactly.
you cut yourself off?
Exactly. So
Yeah, so
that was my
I
dad, and
love
so
it.
I give him credit for that. And the thing about it is that I realized that when I was listening to music, I would, and then when I bought my own 45, I don't know if you remember that. So I would spin my own 45 or whatever was my favorite record, and I would listen to it over and like 50 times, just that one song. And I would listen to all the arrangement, all the production, not so much on the lyrics, but the melody and how the melody was arranged or the music was arranged around the melody, etc. So I paid a lot of attention to that from a young age. And then at 5 years old, my parents put me in piano classes. So I've been classically trained since I was 5. And so and my mom would always say to my dad, if we're traveling somewhere and then all of a sudden, you can't find Ani, just look for the closest music store. And that's where she's
Mm,
at, or the
mm.
record store. That's where we'll find her. So that's kind of like my reputation. And so I've always been, music was, very consequential in my life. And then after I graduated from college in Illinois, I studied economics and political science. So I kept my promise, to my parents. So then I said to them, okay, I kept my promise and I want to do what I want to do. I want to do music. I'm moving to LA instead of going back to Malaysia and join the foreign service. So my parents, okay, you're on your own. Good luck. So I struggled, obviously. I didn't know anyone in this industry. I didn't really understand how the industry worked. I don't know how it works still. And I was real fish out of water because, in the diplomatic and how I was raised, we had etiquette, we had protocol, we had manners.
Welcome to LA, baby.
And the music business, oh my
Oh
God,
my
it was like dog
God.
eat dog world. And I was so,
Yikes.
yeah, I hate the industry. I just love music. I hate the industry. So, but fortunately for me, I started working with some really awesome people. And during in the industry, I was also doing more of the production work, the arrangements. I was doing more what they call the guys, it's the guy thing. Girls were supposed to do lyrics and melody and sing, and guys were doing all the production and the arrangement and the tech stuff, which was where I was doing. So I didn't fit in that way as well. So it's a very sexist industry, very racist industry at that time, probably not as much now. And then you had the different cliques. You had the Jewish group, you had the Black group, you had Latino, you had the Asian group, but I was not that kind of Asian. I was Southeast Asian, not a Korean, or I just didn't fit in. So I was excluded and discriminated, and so yeah, I had a really hard time. But I started working with some amazing people, and Kemo, this contemporary blues artist, was a friend of mine for a long time. And when he made it big, he pulled me in on projects. And so when you contribute a song on a project that wins a Grammy, then you become a Grammy certified songwriter. So you get a certification. You don't get that trophy. So
Hmm.
just to clarify. And but to stay on the theme of music with Muslims for Progressive Values, I you one thing that's really void in American society, Muslim society, is music in our faith tradition. And from wherever we came from Malaysia, women sang. We had spiritual songs. Same in the Arab world, Turkey, Sufi, the whole everyone from where we came from always had a music tradition in our Islamic culture. Somehow we've lost it all when we came to the United States. So it's been stripped of all its fun stuff. And so whatever is musical is in the tradition and in the language of wherever we came from. And so now over the years I've created a catalog of Islamic spiritual songs in English as a way to create an American Muslim tradition,
Yeah.
musical tradition. Yeah.
Well, it is incredible. Like uh, my husband wrote a book on Rumi, and so for 7 years, there was a lot of travel, including to Syria and Turkey and a lot of and I remember just the music was so important. And you
Yeah.
would hear just incredible music. And I remember from we were going to Damascus. We were on, driving in this big sun, and I'm gonna mispronounce her name, but Khatum Alum, or it was a Egyptian singer.
Umi Kathum.
Umi
Umi
Khatum.
Kathum.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got it mixed up. Um, and it was just, I mean, honestly, and people, she was, I mean, the
Uh,
Beatles, but then like 20 times the Beatles. I
yeah.
mean, like people absolutely lost their minds when she would sing, and for good reason. And it
Yeah.
is like, and it is so important that we not strip our, our religious traditions. And I'm not like singling out Muslim. I think that there's a impulse among some folks who want to be pure, that the first to go, one, are women voices, and two, like musical voices, and all the culture that surrounded the beautiful parts of the culture. And so I'm really feeling what you're saying, and I think we miss so much when we strip this, and these voices that elevate us. I
Yeah.
mean, like that. I mean, you can't talk about spirituality without talking about music. I'm sorry.
So I completely agree. And so let me share one story. One of the impetus for starting Muslims for Progressive Values for me was because after 9/11, I had written and produced an Islamic pop CD.
Mm.
And being from Malaysia, which is a Muslim majority culture, it's like music, women singing, there's nothing taboo about it. And then lo and behold, I had no idea what I was wading into here in the United States, that none of the Muslim retail stores would sell my CD because I was a female singer, number one. And number two, because I use all the musical instrumentation, and supposedly that is forbidden because Prophet Muhammad only had the percussion. And I'm like, what the hell is this? So I'm
Wow.
like, okay, I'm done with you guys. I left the mosque, and that's how MPV. That was one of the, like my anger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dare you censor, the female voice? That was number one. And number two is that God is the most. This is my philosophy. Is like God is the most creative entity. Period. Right. And upon creating us as human beings, is the Spirit of God blown into the womb. So we all have that creative spirit in us. There's nothing more creative than singing and your voice and that spiritual connection with music through that singing voice. That's
Mm,
why we have the azan, the call for prayer, and the recitation in the Quran. When
right.
I do the recitation in Arabic, I mean, there's something in there in me that wakes up,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So to really censor that is what we would say is to harden the human heart.
ooh,
And when you harden the human heart is when, the control, the patriarchy, misogynistic, the homophobic, all this dogma takes over because you have lost that empathy and the compassion which is in your heart. And
mm,
that's why every opening of the Quran, except for one, is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. And
mm,
the word Rahim in Arabic means womb, which
mm,
is the most nurturing, the most
mm,
protective, and the most compassionate space
mm.
for any human being or any animal for that matter.
Yes.
So that's
A-
the
and
definition
inherently
of God.
feminine and inherently female. And
Yes.
so
Lo
the
and
book,
behold, and yet we call
yeah,
God a he.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, seriously?
Right, right, right. The book is The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. I'm feeling like you're less and less unlikely all the time. The longer I listen to you, it feels like you're very, very likely. What would you love for people to how would you like people to engage this book? It feels like, some will be Muslims who are looking for this kind of testimony, this kind of voice that to give them their own sense of agency. Others will be non-Muslims who would love to hear this kind of voice. Also, because all traditions, by the way, are wrestling with patriarchy. There's not
Yeah.
one that doesn't. And so, I mean, but how do you imagine, you know, people interacting with your book?
I am looking at this from the perspective of social justice and human rights. So it doesn't matter whether you're a person of faith, Muslim or not, or even secular or atheist, because there is value in utilizing a rights affirming language in advancing our common cause, our common good. And so I really link a lot of stories in the book. So it's not linear. So I really go back and forth. I'm
Mm,
talking about colonialism in Malaysia and comparing it to my experience in Burundi, and how the people there were treated by the Belgians. So I really connect a lot of dots. But most importantly, I think that it's important for people, for especially the young folks, because the publisher is focused on distributing in universities and colleges. And there's questions at the end of the book about, what exercises to do in order for you to learn better about certain subject matters. But I really want the younger folks to really have a long-term strategy that anger is good, but use your anger in a constructive way and
mm,
not in a destructive way. And also to use your anger to fuel longevity, to fuel sustainability, your advocacy in a long-term goal. Not this, cut everybody, chop everybody's knees off, and
right.
and to look at the world from the prism of you need to go where people are at, and you need to win people over.
Mm,
And that's
mm,
hard to do when you're super angry and when you hate another group. And we're having this problem also within the progressive groups, whether Muslim or not, when it comes to what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And there's this, blanket statement about Israel in general and so on and so forth. But there are Israelis who are fighting the cause from within, right? And so we have to work with groups of people who share our values, regardless of what they are. And
mm.
so that's kind of like where I'm hoping that people will get at. Well, what is the common denominator, that thread that binds you to a particular person that you would otherwise not agree with, and you know, how do you bring them along? How do you bring others along, based on that shared slither of shared values.
I think that is a great message for right now. Because if, we're never going to get to the total purity of everyone agreeing on everything. And, but
There's
we
no
can't,
such thing.
there's no
Doesn't
such thing.
exist.
But this idea of values, and can we work together on certain things? Can we come together? And, I think the big movements that have been successful have really tried to incorporate as many people as possible to come together and recognize that we're not exactly on the same page sometimes, but if we're willing to show up with one another, and if we're willing to move forward with one another, that can be courage. And so I just really appreciate that as a theme. I think this is such an important book. I think it allows people to maybe see themselves in a narrative that they thought, oh, I'm so weird. No one is possibly like me. Well, you know what? Actually, there's a lot of us weirdos out there, who are inspired by music and inspired by all kinds of different ways of coming together, and who have had life experiences that have opened us up. And maybe we can, I don't think we're not doing the keep Austin weird kind of thing, but the idea of can we find one another and be with one another. I think it's just a beautiful book. I'm going to say the name one more time: The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. I just love this memoir. I love the fact that you're writing it. I love the fact that you're writing it now after all these years of working so hard. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me on The State of Belief. And for all of our listeners, I say thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief, so please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.